The sound of iron clashing, men shouting, and flames crackling echoed across the coast of Sicily. It was 212 BC, and the world's mightiest war machine, the Roman Empire, had surrounded the proud city of Syracuse. But somewhere within those walls, an old man, half scientist, half magician, was about to turn sunlight into a weapon of destruction. They say that as Roman ships advanced toward the harbor, their bronze armor gleamed under the Mediterranean sun. Then, suddenly, it gleamed too bright. One ship caught fire, then another, and another. The Romans, terrified, thought the gods themselves were against them. At the center of this miracle stood Archimedes, the greatest mind of the ancient world, holding not a sword, but a mirror, or so the legend claims. But let's rewind. Who was this man who could allegedly burn ships with light? Archimedes of Syracuse wasn't just an inventor. He was a mathematician, engineer, a philosopher whose ideas were centuries ahead of his time. Born around 287 BC, in a city caught between Greek intellect and Roman power, Archimedes lived in a world where knowledge itself could be dangerous. To him, war was just another problem to be solved, an equation of geometry, force, and fire. When Rome declared war on Carthage, Syracuse tried to stay neutral. But alliances shifted. The city was eventually pulled into the Second Punic War, and by 214 BC, Roman legions led by Marcus Claudius Marcellus arrived to seize it. They expected an easy victory. Instead, they met Archimedes. From the high cliffs of the island city, the old inventor unleashed machines that made Roman generals tremble. Giant catapults hurled stones the size of oxen. Hidden cranes lifted enemy ships out of the sea and smashed them against rocks. The Romans described it as fighting against a mind greater than an army. Still, the legend of the burning mirrors remains the most haunting of them all. Could sunlight alone destroy Roman ships? Or was this story just ancient propaganda, an exaggerated myth born of fear? Let's look closer. Ancient historians like Lucian, Galen, and Anthemius of Tralles mention devices that focused sunlight through polished bronze mirrors. The most famous account, however, comes from Galen of Pergamon, centuries after Archimedes' death. He claimed the scientist used a series of mirrors to focus sunlight onto a single point, like magnifying glass fire on a leaf. But here's the problem. None of Archimedes' surviving writings mention such a device. Not once. So where did this story come from? Was it based on truth, or an ancient misunderstanding of one of his real inventions? Roman survivors of the siege described their ships bursting into flame as they approached. Some believed the fire came from pitch and oil. Others whispered that divine fire struck from the heavens. Over time, as storytellers embellished the tale, it transformed into something almost magical, Archimedes' death ray. But imagine this for a moment. A harbor filled with glinting mirrors, each controlled by trained men. A line of sunlight focused like a blade across the water. The Romans advancing, unaware. And then blinding light, smoke, fire, and panic. Could it be real? The siege of Syracuse would last 2 years, and Archimedes' inventions kept the Romans at bay longer than anyone expected. Yet in the end, genius alone could not stop fate. As Roman legions breached the city walls, Archimedes' greatest challenge, and perhaps his greatest myth, was about to face the light of truth. The streets of Syracuse were quiet that morning, too quiet for a city under siege. Roman scouts watched from afar, puzzled. The sea glimmered under the Sicilian sun, and the walls stood unmoved. Somewhere inside, a man with unkempt hair and ink-stained fingers drew circles in the dust. That man was Archimedes. He wasn't a soldier. He never carried a weapon, yet his mind was sharper than any Roman sword. Archimedes' workshop overlooked the great harbor. From there, he could see every Roman ship, every sail, every move. He spent hours sketching diagrams on parchment, calculating trajectories, and testing models with his small team of assistants, men who were as terrified of his intellect as the Romans were of his machines. "Give me a place to stand," Archimedes once said, "and I will move the earth." That wasn't arrogance, it was geometry. He had discovered the law of the lever, proving that balance could defeat brute force. Now, he wanted to test that theory on an empire. As the siege continued, Archimedes unleashed devices that seemed almost supernatural. There were ballistae, gigantic crossbows that hurled spears through the air with terrifying precision. There were stone throwers built with a perfect understanding of parabolic motion. He even invented a steam-powered cannon, centuries before gunpowder existed. But it was his so-called burning mirrors that would make his name immortal and controversial. Some say he began experimenting after noticing how sunlight reflected off the polished bronze shields of soldiers during drills. He observed how light could blind an enemy for a second, distract them, and even heat their armor. That fleeting observation became an obsession. He ordered dozens of bronze mirrors, each one polished to near perfection. Then, under his direction, they were arranged in a half-circle along the wall facing the Roman fleet. The goal, to focus all their reflected sunlight onto a single point, the sails and hulls of the approaching ships. According to later sources, when a Roman fleet drew near, Archimedes' assistants waited for his signal. The sun rose higher, its reflection shimmering across the harbor like waves of molten gold. Then, Archimedes raised his hand. The mirrors shifted in unison. For a moment, nothing happened. Then smoke curled up from one of the ships. The pitch caught fire. A scream echoed across the water. Within minutes, the ship was ablaze. The Romans, panicked, turned away. The wind carried the fire to other vessels, spreading chaos through the fleet. It sounded like a miracle. But was it? That's where history blurs into legend. Writers like Lucian and Zonaras recorded the tale centuries later, long after anyone who'd seen it was gone. The first detailed written version appeared in the 6th century AD by Anthemius of Tralles, who mentioned Archimedes using burning mirrors to ignite enemy ships. But even he admitted it was told by the ancients. No eyewitness accounts from the Roman side mention mirrors. Only destruction. Only fire. So what could explain it? Perhaps Archimedes had another trick. Some historians believe he might have used Greek fire, a flammable liquid weapon known later in Byzantine warfare. Others think he used catapults launching burning projectiles, which might have appeared as if the ships caught fire mysteriously. Over time, storytellers filled the gaps with wonder and imagination. Still, something about the mirror theory refused to die. The idea that one man, through pure intellect, could harness the sun itself to fight an empire was too irresistible. It transformed Archimedes from scientist to mythic sorcerer, a symbol of the human mind defying the gods. Even Marcus Claudius Marcellus, the Roman commander who led the assault, is said to have admired him deeply. After the fall of Syracuse, Marcellus reportedly ordered his soldiers to capture Archimedes alive. "Do not harm him," he said. "Bring me the man who defied Rome." But fate had other plans. As the siege reached its breaking point, Archimedes' light would soon fade, for good. By the time the Romans breached the first walls of Syracuse, fear had already spread among their ranks. Every man had heard the same whisper that the old Greek inside the city could burn ships with sunlight. It was said even seasoned sailors refused to approach the harbor by day. To them, the sea wasn't glittering with sunlight. It was glowing with Archimedes' wrath. Inside the city, Archimedes worked relentlessly. His hands shook from exhaustion, but his mind was relentless, sharp as ever. The Roman siege was tightening. Supplies were dwindling, but his obsession with the mirror weapon had grown stronger. Some accounts claim that by now, he had refined the design. Rows of burnished bronze plates, each adjusted with mathematical precision. The mirrors were curved, parabolic, focusing sunlight to a single, devastating point. Assistants positioned them according to his geometric calculations, calling out numbers and angles while the old man stood at the center, like a conductor leading a symphony of light. Then, as the sun rose, the city walls came alive. Beams of concentrated fire burst across the harbor. One Roman ship, its hull coated in tar, suddenly caught flame. The men screamed. The oars fell silent. Smoke filled the sky. The Romans couldn't believe it. They turned their ships away. But behind them, the wind carried the fire faster than their fear. The sea burned. That's how the legend goes. But centuries later, scholars would question every part of it. Could it even work? Could ancient mirrors, hand-polished from bronze, really focus enough light to ignite a ship hundreds of feet away? In 1973, Greek scientist Ioannis Akas decided to find out. He constructed an array of 70 mirrors, each about the size of a shield, polished and curved to mimic those Archimedes might have used. His target, a wooden ship stationed 160 feet away in the Greek harbor of Skarmagas. When the mirrors aligned and sunlight hit the target, smoke appeared within seconds. After just 2 minutes, flames erupted. The experiment stunned the audience. The death ray seemed possible. But then came the skeptics. In 2005, the TV show Mythbusters repeated the experiment. Using 300 mirrors and a wooden replica ship, they failed to ignite the target. Their conclusion? Busted. They claimed the weapon was impractical, too fragile, too slow, too dependent on perfect sunlight. Yet, even they admitted something strange. Under ideal conditions, the mirrors did produce enough heat to smoke the wood. They called it a fascinating optical weapon, but not a realistic one. However, later, in 2010, the Mythbusters revisited the test at MIT, with engineers using advanced alignment systems, and this time they succeeded in setting fire to the target after several minutes. So, could it be that Archimedes' death ray wasn't a myth after all, but a misunderstood reality? If it truly worked even once, the psychological impact on the Romans would have been devastating. Imagine soldiers seeing sunlight itself turned into fire, believing they fought against divine punishment. Ancient warfare wasn't just about weapons, it was about fear. Whether or not Archimedes' mirrors destroyed ships, the story achieved something greater. It terrified an army and immortalized a man. Still, no matter how brilliant his inventions, the fate of Syracuse was sealed. In 212 BC, the Romans broke through the final defenses. Archimedes, tired, frail, and still absorbed in his calculations, didn't even look up when Roman soldiers stormed his home. When one of them demanded he follow, he replied softly, "Do not disturb my circles." Moments later, the soldier's sword fell. Archimedes, the greatest mind of the ancient world, was dead. His death marked the end of Syracuse's glory and the beginning of his legend. The Romans took his inventions, his writings, his machines, but they could never take his light. And centuries later, that same light would spark a question that still burns today. Was Archimedes truly the man who turned the sun into a weapon? The fall of Syracuse was not just the fall of a city. It was the extinguishing of an age of wonder. The Romans stormed through its streets, burning, looting, and killing. But amid the chaos, one question burned brighter than the flames. What happened to Archimedes' inventions? When the dust settled, the Roman commander Marcellus walked through the ruins, searching for the old man. Instead, he found silence and scattered scrolls filled with diagrams no Roman could understand. Among them, some say, were designs of curved mirrors and notes on solar focus. Marcellus ordered his men to preserve whatever they could. Yet most of Archimedes' work was lost, either destroyed during the siege or misunderstood by those who found it. The legend, however, refused to die. For centuries, scholars and philosophers debated the death ray. In Byzantium, engineers tried to recreate it. In era manuscripts, scholars wrote about the burning power of the Greek philosopher. Even during the Renaissance, scientists like Leonardo da Vinci studied the story, sketching parabolic mirrors in his notebooks, wondering if Archimedes had achieved the impossible. The myth of the burning mirrors transformed into something larger. The idea that knowledge, pure, untainted genius, could challenge empires. Archimedes became a symbol, not just of intellect, but of rebellion. But let's strip away the myth for a moment and look through the eyes of reality. Could it really have worked in battle? Modern physics tells us the answer lies in distance, reflection, and material. To ignite wood from even 100 feet away, the mirrors would have needed near-perfect curvature and alignment. The slightest movement of the sun or a ship's rocking would scatter the rays. Moreover, the Romans used wet, pitch-coated wood, which doesn't ignite easily. Under real siege conditions, with wind, smoke, and chaos, it would have been nearly impossible. The weapon may have worked as a psychological trick rather than a practical one, blinding Roman sailors, dazzling them, setting small fires on sails or tar, making them believe the Greeks controlled the sun. And fear, in war, can be deadlier than any weapon. Still, not everyone dismissed it. In 1970, Greek historian Evangelos Stamatis proposed a hybrid theory, that Archimedes used both mirrors and incendiary arrows, combining optics and firepower. In his version, the mirrors were used to distract and blind the Romans, while the catapults launched flaming bolts into the confusion. The Romans, unable to understand the trick, described it as ships catching fire from sunlight. It's plausible and fits both physics and history. So perhaps the death ray wasn't a literal laser weapon, but a masterful illusion, crafted by a man who understood not only geometry, but human fear. Yet, as time passed, the legend grew stronger. Painters depicted Archimedes standing tall on the walls of Syracuse, mirrors blazing in his hands like divine tools. Poets called him the man who captured the sun. And maybe, in some symbolic way, that's true. Archimedes didn't need to burn ships to leave his mark. He burned his name into history. His mirrors reflected something far greater than sunlight, the limitless power of the human mind. Even Marcellus, the Roman who conquered him, couldn't help but mourn. There was never another like him, he wrote. He who used reason as his sword. But as the centuries rolled on, one question lingered like the faint shimmer of light on bronze. What if the story was real? What if, buried beneath the ruins of Syracuse, lies proof that Archimedes truly did create a weapon the world wasn't ready for? Centuries have passed since Archimedes drew his final circle in the sand, but his legend still refuses to die. Scientists, engineers, and dreamers continue to test the boundaries of that ancient story, trying to answer a question as old as the siege of Syracuse itself. Could one man truly weaponize sunlight? And what they've discovered is both humbling and profound. In the early 21st century, researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, revisited the question with modern precision. Using computer-guided mirrors and exact mathematical alignment, they successfully ignited a wooden target nearly 100 feet away. The results shocked skeptics. It could work, but only under near-perfect conditions. They concluded that while the death ray may not have been practical as a battlefield weapon, it was scientifically possible. And that's the key. The myth wasn't born from fantasy. It was born from potential. Archimedes understood principles of optics, reflection, and parabolic geometry centuries before they were properly studied. Even if his device never functioned as described, it wasn't beyond his intellect to imagine it. In that sense, the death ray wasn't a lie. It was an idea ahead of its time. But there's another layer. Ancient warfare thrived on fear and belief. If soldiers believed a city was protected by divine fire, that belief alone could halt an assault. A blinding flash of light, a burning sail, or a single spark might have been enough to convince Roman sailors that the gods themselves were on Syracuse's side. Archimedes didn't just fight with machines. He fought with perception. His real weapon wasn't sunlight. It was psychological warfare crafted through science. Still, as historians debate and scientists experiment, there's something almost poetic about the story's endurance. It's a reminder that human curiosity doesn't fade, it burns. The same sunlight that may have scorched Roman ships now powers solar panels, fuels clean energy, and drives spacecraft beyond our world. Maybe Archimedes wasn't building a weapon at all. Maybe he was dreaming of something far greater, a world where light itself could serve mankind. Before his death, Archimedes once wrote, "Mathematics reveals the invisible." Perhaps that's what his mirrors truly did. Not burn ships, but reveal what humanity could achieve through reason, imagination, and faith in the impossible. Because even if the death ray never existed as history tells it, the story still burns bright, as a symbol of how the mind of one man can ignite the curiosity of generations. And that, more than any weapon, is the true light of Archimedes.